So this study skills video should helpfully support you in how to approach short answer exam questions. It's probably worth mentioning at the start of this that you may come across BALs throughout any of the questions in the exam paper. This concept should underpin the whole specification, the whole syllabus. So if it's mentioned, you've really got to respond to it and acknowledge it. For those of you that don't remember, BAL stands for Balanced, Active, Healthy Lifestyle. And essentially, it's talking about what it is to be healthy, having general health. More specifically, you might get BAL's questions linking to drugs, exercise, asthma, diet, and smoking. And sort of a little way of remembering these is DEADS. So if you remember that BALS is partly about general health, but it also might be specific to the DEADS criteria. And if, as I said, you do see it in a question, you must link your answer to BALS. So, short answer questions now. These might be what we call AO1 or AO2 questions, and these questions actually make up a decent proportion of your AS exam question. So of your whole exam grade. 45% of the marks that you can get are from these short answer questions. And the short answer questions will come from all of the three sections that make up your course. So anatomy and physiology, sociocultural, and acquiring movement skills. In each of those three sections, the short answers are worth 20 marks, which gives a total of 60 marks out of 90 available for answering short answer questions. Really valuable, really important to then get your head around. And these questions typically have 5 questions, A, B, C, D, E, and these short answer questions make up the A to D questions, and they might range between 1 and 6 marks per question. Fundamentally, these AO1 or AO2 questions require you to show off your factual knowledge and to give some level of explanation. So just a little overview again of the demands of each of these types of questions. So AO1, AO2, as I said, knowledge and understanding. It's factual knowledge, factual understanding. Knowledge can quite often be recall, stating things, identifying things. It can be quite easy marks to get if you know your stuff. So giving keywords, using the terminology, using the phrases, and making statements. You might also be asked to explain or apply your knowledge, so a little bit of development of those factual points. Our AO3 questions, so we're going to just mention these in this video, but we'll talk about them in more depth in the extended question video. So AO3 questions are about analysing and evaluating or discussing. They require a lot more from you. They're about higher level commands, and they use higher level command verbs. You must develop, you must apply, you must include examples. So you've got to give more to earn your marks for AO3 questions. And there is an opportunity for independent thinking and giving balanced arguments in questions. But as I said, we're going to ignore that for the minute. Verbs. So verbs are really central in terms of you understanding and answering a question well. So in the blue we've got our AO1 and AO2 verbs. Now there's quite a distinct difference between the green and the blue. So these more simple verbs and these more demanding verbs. Comment on, describe, identify, state, outline, explain, give reasons for. Quite simplistic, and they require factual statements as answers. Whereas the AO3, discuss, evaluate, compare, contrast, justify, analyse. Again, much richer verbs that demand more from you. Remember that obviously AO3 you can give your own opinion as well. But again, we're going to focus on the blue short answer type verbs this video. So the first thing you need to do when you approach your paper is read, of course, maybe once or twice the question, and then interpret the question. And what we mean by interpret is make sense of it, understand exactly what they want me to answer. What commonly gets done by students is they see a question, they read it, and then they write something about something they may have seen and hope it's the right thing, or write everything they know about the topic they recognise, and that doesn't necessarily get you marks. And there's a little process I think that you should go through when you interpret a question. Firstly, identify the verb, the key verb. Now, the previous slide I showed you the different sorts of verbs you might come across in a question. So the blue AO1 verbs were like describe, identify, state, quite simplistic. So firstly, make a mental note of what the verb is. Secondly, what's the general topic of the question? So what's the broad area that the question is about? And then most importantly, what is the specific content? What is the specific demand of the question? What actually do the examiners want you to write about? A lot of students will go straight to this, they'll recognise a topic and off they go writing. And actually, they sometimes miss the key point of what the question has asked them. So it's really important to go through this process and make sure you get this bit right. So the VGS, verb general specific, I think is a suggestion from me to help you interpret questions well. And I've put it in a text table here so you can see. Verb. This will give you a clue on what sort of depth of information the examiner wants, what it wants you to do with, if it wants you to compare, if it wants you to list. General, what's the general topic area? And then, as I said, be specific about what they actually want. There may be a couple of things that the examiner wants you to do, so you need to identify if there's different parts of a question as well. It's obviously quite helpful to look at the marks available with a question. So is it a 2 mark, is it a 4 mark, is it a 6 mark question? So once you know how many marks are available, you can then dictate how much time, how many points you make. In the short answer questions, basically every tick you get is a mark. So you make a correct point, you get a tick, you get a mark for it. Beware, because sometimes questions come in this sort of a format where it says, state 3 factors that affect people's participation in exercise. Now, it's asked specifically for you to tell them 3. If you go on and say 15, the examiner will ignore the last 12. It will only mark the first 3 points you make, the first 3 marks you give, whether they're right or wrong. They won't search through your 15 points hoping that they find 3 right ones. They'll just purely mark the first 3. So you need to be very clear. If the question states a specific number, that's what they'll mark. Also, as I said right from the very start of this video, if they mention bowels, you've got to acknowledge it in your answer. So here's a couple of examples. So the question here says large amounts of blood need to be circulated around the body during prolonged aerobic exercise. Identify the mechanisms of venous return and ensure that sufficient supply of blood is returned to the heart during exercise. We have noticed there's 3 marks available, and the first thing I'm going to do is go through my VGS process. So the verb is identify, which actually means that when I give my answer, all they need me to do is give a list stating or identifying the mechanisms. And there's my answer, a list of 5 things. You would not get downgraded for not writing it in a big elongated paragraph. So where it says identify or state, you don't need to go into loads of detail. Just give them what they know. Here's another example. Identify the economic system of the USA and explain how it influences sport in the USA. So you should hopefully know that you're going to go through the VGS process. The verb, in actual fact, there are 2 verbs here, identify and explain. So we know we've got 2 parts to this question, and it's a 5-mark question. And actually, let's have a look at the mark scheme. I wanted to pick out how mark schemes work. So here's our 2 parts to this question. This part gives you a sub-maximal value, so one of the 5 marks will come from the first part, identify the economic system, and the other 4 marks come from the second part of the question, explaining about the economic system. This column here, which is generally numbered, your keywords. This would relate to the identify demand. So what? This column here gives more depth and explanation, and this would be the explain part, the why. So this is the identify and this is the explanation. Also worth pointing out that often in mark schemes they have things they'll accept, so even if you don't get it exactly spot on, they'll accept certain variations. However, there are some things that they won't accept, so don't accept these things. So this exam question, I've written a sample answer to try to show you how marks can be got. Here's my first sentence. USA has a capitalist economic system, and from the mark scheme I'd have got a point here for identifying it as a capitalist economic system. The second sentence, the high profile of sport in the media makes them viable commercial opportunity, etc., etc. Now, I'd have got a point here for saying about the media. I got a mark for talking about sport being commercial. I've got a mark for saying that teams are bought and sold and function as franchises, which are businesses. Here's my next sentence. Because of the win ethic, I'd have got a mark. I've got a mark for talking about the nature of the US sports, the being fast and furious. I've got a mark for referencing the American dream and how it can get people out of trouble, and about the risk of deviant behaviour. Now all of those, this is an example, and all of these points are on the mark scheme. And I've just picked out such as, because, means that, and such as here, because these are linking phrases. These show the because is it the explanation. So that's the sort of language I'd expect to see in an explanation answer. And we'll talk about linking words and phrases in the extended video. So here's a final example. Using practical examples, describe the nature of a motor program for 4 marks. Remember, we'd go through our VGS process. The verb is describe, and also it has actually asked in the question for practical examples. If you don't give that, you won't get full marks. So for 3 of the 4 marks, the theory descriptions, for 1 mark for your example. Here again the key words. This is the description part of it, and again for any example part you get 1 mark. And here's my example answer. So this is my first sentence. I would have had a point here for stating what a motor program is. I've had a point here for saying that it gets stored in long-term memory. For example, so I'm going to get my point for the practical example. I go on to give a practical example. Here's my example mark. Talking about practice is required. Talking about motor programs being made up of subroutines and being initiated by a single decision. And my final sentence, I'd have got a point for saying that motor programs will be learned better if they're reinforced by success or by praise. So again, this is a lot of marks. I've shown how the mark scheme can translate into sentences in a paragraph. So remember, you interpret the question by firstly identifying the verb or verbs in the question. What is the general topic, and what is the specific content that the question wants you to talk about?